discussion on staffing and coordinating. The previous lecture I discussed about human resource management process with recruitment, human resource planning, job analysis, job specification and job description. And after that I also discussed about how the training is relevant in the organization and various approaches of management development like on the job training and off the job training methods. Then we discussed about various business games and experiential exercises, then the role of coaches and the mentors in developing individuals. Then after that we will be discussing about how performance appraisal is a sequel to these various elements of human resource management process, and with specific reference to performance appraisal, I will start with the discussion on performance appraisal, then performance basic concepts of performance management system and then the purpose of performance management system. Let us start with the fundamental definition of performance appraisal. Performance, when an individual joins an organization, he has been given a responsibility or a task, then after that he starts doing his work, and and then the person is given various types of say training, various trainings on the job and off the job training, so that he can improve his or her performance, and the person would be able to exhibit his competencies in the job assigned to him, and the organization would see that the person performs to the best of his potential. But the person's performance need to be appraised from time to time in order to identify the training needs, as we have already discussed. So, performance appraisal means evaluating an employee's current or past performance with respect to his or her performance standards. So, it also involves setting performance standards like what he or she should exhibit in the job, what is expected of the job and what should the employee perform. So, there should be some performance standard, and it assumes that employees receives adequate training, and there is also a feedback given to the employee from time to time, and based on the feedback, if the employee is performing as per the requirement of the job position, so then there should be some reward given to employees, a reward or incentive. And if there is a performance gap, that means if the employee is expected to exhibit a required performance level or performance standard and his performance is much lower than that, or he is not able to perform as required by the job position, so then there is a need to give some kind of training, some training as per the requirement of the job. So, this will eliminate the performance deficiency of an individual. So, what we have discussed is performance appraisal means evaluating an employee's current or past performance relative to his or her performance standards. So, it also involves setting performance standards and assumes that employee receives the training, feedback and incentives required to eliminate performance deficiencies. So, what are the basic concepts in performance management? We will be discussing each one of them, like what is performance appraisal, what is performance management. So, performance appraisal means evaluating an employee's current or past performance related to performance standards. Performance management is entire integrated process, or it is a continuous, it is an integrated process of continuously identifying, measuring, developing performance of an individual and aligning his performance with the organizational or strategic goals. For example, if the organizational goal is say is customer satisfaction, if organizational goal is say innovation, or organizational goal is growth. So, what is the individual's contribution in the respective job position, and what in that position what exactly he is supposed to do, what are the demands of that job. So, there has to be an assessment based on the required competencies, the required skills and the expected performance norms the person is supposed to exhibit. So, there will be a match, or there has to be an alignment of individual's performance with that of the strategic goals. Then evaluation affects performance levels. Purpose of performance evaluation is provide input to general human resource decisions. Performance appraisal helps in promotion, helps in in deciding about the transfer as well as termination decisions of any individual. It identifies whether the individual requires any kind of skill training or any developmental needs. If a person is not able to adequately perform on the job because of lack of knowledge, job knowledge, or a particular skill is missing, so a kind of skill training will be given. Similarly, developmental needs are required to be given to the individual when he is not able to carry out, when the individual is not only having say skill deficiency, but also missing on cognitive skills, decision making skills, some managerial skills are missing in the individual, which would not help him adequately perform on the job. So, there is a need for the skill training and developmental needs. So, performance evaluation helps in identifying or helps in taking decisions like promotion, transfer, termination, and it also helps in identification. It also helps in identifying the skill and skill training and developmental needs. Performance it provides performance feedback to the employees, supplies the basis for reward allocation decisions, allocation of rewards, incentives or promotion. So, supplies the basis for reward allocation decisions like merit pay increase and other rewards. For organizational behavioral specialists, the key purpose of performance evaluation are the last two, a mechanism for feedback and reward allocation, which otherwise means how does performance evaluation help the managers or organizational behaviorist to take decisions. Organizational behavior specialists take decisions based on the performance evaluation, whether to give feedback or to allocate reward to an individual. Then what is evaluated? Let us discuss about what should be evaluated, whether it is an individual task outcome or a behavior or the traits of an individual. Which of them is to be evaluated? Let us discuss about the first one, that is task outcome, individual's performance on the task. There are the matrices, these are individual task outcomes are the matrices that directly result from employee effort such as sales, turnover, quality. So, which can give you how much the person is able to perform or not able to perform on the assigned task. If a person is employed as a sales representative, so there would be some job specific demands, certain job attributes, and a person is supposed to carry out those expected norms. If he or she fails in performing as per the expected norms, as per the expected standards, performance standards, so then we can assess that the person is missing on some task outcomes, or the person is not able to exhibit the results as expected by the job. Then behavior, then comes the next factor, that is behavior. The individual is also expected to have to exhibit certain behavioral norms like sincerity, then say how many sales calls he or she has made, the promptness or say communication skills, ability to negotiate, or some more some more criteria like interpersonal skills, trustworthiness and so on. So, when direct results are difficult to determine, when you cannot easily identify the person's performance or you are not able to identify the the impact of or the person's contribution on the job directly, it can also and its impact on the results. When the direct results are difficult to determine in terms of the output, so it can also be evaluated based on the behavior of the individual, and certain documented actions such as how many sales calls or the person's persistence on the job, the promptness to deliver a duty in submitting reports or say in completing assignments, tasks. So, or non-productive activities like taking taking initiative, volunteerism or say initiative taking. So, these things can also be considered as some aspects which are required by an individual on the job. So, behavior based assessment is an important attribute for performance evaluation. So, what we have discussed is result based assessment, behavior based assessment, and the third point is trait based assessment, which is also important for performance evaluation. Trait based assessment is based on the personality of an individual. Generally, it is considered to be weak because they do not reflect productivity. Often used, but these include attitude, confidence and say and some more criteria of individuals, leadership traits of an individual and so on. So, in performance appraisal basically is done on the basis of results, behavior and traits, personality traits. The next point is who should do the evaluation? Who are the people who are responsible for performance evaluation? Should it be immediate supervisors or the peers or a particular committee which is designated to evaluate performance like the rating committee, or it should be self rating, appraisal by the subordinates or a 360-degree feedback. So, in some companies they have either of them, or they consider either there is a committee which is appraising or there is a self rating 360-degree feedback. So, it differs from company to company what type of performance appraisal system they adopt. Generally, in a job which is highly responsible, or when you consider a person to be in a very responsible position, so their self rating is being done. Sometimes when a person is involved in an activity where he or she would be interacting with different people, where the job demands coordination of different functions in the department, different functional areas in the organization. So, there you cannot judge an individual based on the rating alone by the supervisor or immediate supervisor or the appraisal by subordinates. So, there has to be a rating committee or there is a need for a 360-degree performance feedback assessment, where you can say gauge individual's potentials on the basis of his performance on the job or the result based assessment, the behavior of an individual with different people who are involved with him or her, and lastly a trait based assessment. So, 360-degree performance feedback would be by supervisors, peers, then appraisal by subordinates. It is an overall assessment of an individual, Appraisal by subordinate is also sometimes subordinates can better tell whether the person has been doing his duty effectively or not. Subordinates can assess about the behavior of the individual, can assess about say personality traits, and so these assessments are in some organizations done by the subordinates, and sometimes the supervisors directly observe the person who is exhibiting, who is carrying out responsibilities, and in order to make it unbiased, sometimes rating committees are also formed. So, these are various ways through which the evaluation can be done. Now, let us discuss about the methods of performance evaluation or performance appraisal. In some organizations, it can be a written essay, critical incidents, graphical rating scales, and behaviorally anchored rating scale, and so on. So, we will discuss each one of them in details. What is a written essay? When an individual is being rated, so a qualitative assessment can be made about an individual based on the observation by the supervisor, the one who is directly observing the behavior or the results performed by the individual. So, it can be written in the form of a narrative describing an employee's strengths, weaknesses, past performance, potential, and suggestions for improvement or giving a feedback to the individual. So, it is a kind of a qualitative assessment. In a qualitative assessment, a narrative describing an employee's strengths. What are the strengths of an individual? Whether he has leadership uh, mm, skills, or his initiative taking, he is good at initiative taking, he finishes job or assignments on time, time bound assignments, completion of assignments, or any other specific skill which an individual is good at can be narrated in the form of a essay, and then the individual can be suggested for improvement if he fails to perform on any of these dimensions. So, this is one method of assessment of an individual. The second one is critical incidents, because in a written essay it is an overall observation of an individual, of a supervisor who is rating an employee. So, it would be based on his observation and it would be person specific. So, and there is there is no critical incidents associated. In critical incident, which is again a qualitative assessment, it is again a qualitative assessment of an employee or qualitative assessment of a subordinate. So, what is critical incident? Critical incident evaluates the behavior that are key in making the difference between executing a job effectively and executing it ineffectively. Otherwise, we can say a supervisor can assess why a person could perform efficiently and vice versa. So, there are some critical instances which can be recorded. Unlike the essay or the narratives, critical incidents can be recorded and a statement can be given. Say for example, a person has not been able to perform a specific task on a certain time. So, what is the reason? A rationale can be or a reason can be associated with that specific instance, stating that a person failed to perform a duty on a specific date on a specific time due to these reasons, because of inadequate training or inadequate knowledge, because the failure of the infrastructure. So, you can record whether it is due to the person's incompetency or because of lack of adequate resources. So, critical incidents gives you exact reason for performance and non-performance. As compared to the written essay would in depth analyze in the form of a narrative about a person's strengths, weaknesses, past performance, potentials and suggestions for improvement without associating any rational or reasons with those instances. Then moving further is graphic rating scale. So, what we have discussed now is critical essay and critical incidents and written essay, and these two are qualitative forms of assessment. Moving further is graphic rating scale. It is an evaluation method in which evaluator rates performance factors on an incremental scale or on a quantitative scale in the form of a graphic rating scale on a 5-point Likert type scale. So, how does it differ from the previous ones? In the earlier discussion, in the earlier say essay type and critical incidents, it was just an observation recorded by the supervisor without giving any kind of objective assessment. So, there is no number associated with, say suppose if I say number is not associated with any trait which is being measured. Say if I say the person is persistent or person is committed to the job. So, what is the level of commitment is not known in qualitative assessment. How can you differentiate one person from another person based on how much committed a person is, or how can you differentiate between one person and another person on the basis of the commitment, level of commitment? So, if there are two employees for whom we have a written statement or written essay that both of them are committed, if tomorrow there is a assessment based on this assessment, you have to take a judgment to give a promotion. So, who should be better qualified for this position? Should it be a person A or B? So, if you have an objective assessment to evaluate two individuals, then a rating scale would definitely have an upper edge over the qualitative assessment, or quantitative assessment would definitely have an advantage or edge over the qualitative assessment. So, sufficing this, graphic rating scale is an evaluation in which the evaluator rates performance factors on an incremental scale or on a quantitative scale. It keeps up with current, say for example, keeps up with current regulations, policies and regulations. If this is one particular question or an attribute, whether an individual abides by the policies and regulations, and you can differentiate between 2 individuals, 5 individuals on a 5-point rating scale. One is completely aware to fully aware. How much is the person aware of about the rules and regulations? How much is the person committed to the organization? What is the level of physical engagement of an individual to his job? What is the level of emotional engagement of an individual to the job? So, we can say the person A is more committed than the other, we can say the person B is less committed than the other based on the quantitative number associated with the attributes. Moving further, we will discuss about another form of performance evaluation, which is called behaviorally anchored rating scale. As we learnt that assessment of an individual can be judged on the basis of the behavior, on the basis of the traits as well as on results. So, behavior based assessment is important, and also we learnt that qualitative and quantitative assessments are different on terms of their subjective and objective nature. So, behaviorally anchored rating scale is an assessment which combines the behavior based assessment which is not qualitatively judged, but it is anchored on a rating scale like the graphic rating scale. The behavior, that means very simply we can say the behavior of an individual can be rated on a rating scale is called behaviorally anchored rating scale. So, this scale, what is the attribute of this scale? This scale combines major element from the critical elements. That means what we discussed, the critical instances or incidents can be combined in a graphic rating scale. So, suppose I will give you one example. So, suppose somebody say a customer has been able to address to the problems of the clients. So, client's query has been handled efficiently by an employee A. So, we want to find out what is that critical incident when if I want to award somebody. So, I need to know how he has handled the query of a customer, customer handling or customer satisfaction index, customer satisfaction index. So, we can record a critical instance when he or she, when the employee could address this problem. When a client A has raised a query or client A has lodged a complaint. So, this complaint was addressed by employee say a certain a particular employee who could take the questions and who has given rational or a logical answer to the complaint and who has addressed his query with some kind of a rational or a kind of say a response which was satisfying the customer, which was satisfying the client. So, this particular instance, which when did this happen, how did the query being handled, this can be rated on a graphic rating scale. A particular behavior like how to address the query of the customer. So, can be rated on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scale. Employee A has addressed this by has addressed the problem of a customer. So, we can rate him as 5. As a manager, as a supervisor, I can rate him 5. Whereas, when there is another employee who has been given this particular query or this particular complaint or this situation. So, he could not address or maybe his level of addressing the query or satisfying the customer is little lesser in tendency. So, you can probably associate a number say 2, 3 or 4. So, we are grading the individual, the employee on a particular behavior, associating it with a graphic rating scale. So, what is behaviorally anchored rating scale? BARS, otherwise it is called, is a scale that combines major elements from critical incidents. Like in this particular example, I have stated that customer, how they address to the query of customer. Similarly, what is the level of dutifulness or conscientiousness of an individual can also be assessed from the so scales that combine major elements from the critical incidents along with the graphic rating scale. The appraiser rates the employee based on items along a continuum or a rating scale, but the points are examples of actual behavior on a given job rather than general descriptions. That means, there is no qualitative assessment, but the actual behavior of an individual is being assessed on a graphic rating scale. So, for example, we want to assess the punctuality of an individual. Rather than saying he was punctual or less punctual, which would be very subjective assessment, we can have an objective assessment of an individual like never late for work, late 1 to 2 times per month or late 3 or more times per month. This type of statements can be generated and we can associate or quantify in terms of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in along with this rating. So, along with this qualitative assessment. So, then this is a better way of rating an individual, because you have a qualitative assessment along with a graphic rating. So, other methods of performance management are forced comparison methods, evaluating one individual's performance relating to the performance of another individual, or who is better, A or B, group order ranking, an evaluation method that places employees in a particular classification such as quartiles. 10% are in the group of A, 20% are in the group of B, 40% fall in the category of C and 20% in D, and so on. So, a group order ranking, similarly there is individual ranking also done, an evaluation method that ranks orders employees from best to worst, like say who is number 1, who is number 2, and so on. So, methods of performance appraisal that we discussed are behaviorally anchored rating scale, then essay method, then we also discussed about critical incidents, then forced comparison, and then we will. So, these methods are commonly brought in use in organizations. Moving further, we will discuss about what are the suggestions for improving performance evaluation. So, after discussing various methods, now we can have an assessment of which method is better than the other. So, use multiple evaluators to overcome any rater bias, like halo effect or leniency error while evaluating the performance of the employees. So, a manager has to be bias free, that is what we discussed while taking decisions. In decision making, we discussed that as individuals bring their own personal biases. So, it is always better to have multiple evaluators. So, we do not have any recency error, we do not have any say past notions, perception bias. Every individual has to be evaluated perfectly based on how he or she performs. Evaluate selectively based on evaluators' competence, and train evaluators to improve rater accuracy. The evaluators also need to know how to overcome the biases. Provide employees with due process. Individuals are provided with adequate notice of performance expectation. All relevant evidence of a violation is aired in a fair hearing. With the individuals given an opportunity to respond, final decision is based on evidence and is free of bias. So, lastly we will discuss about performance feedback can be given to individuals, to the managers whose performance is being appraised. Why managers are unwilling to give feedback? Generally managers feel reluctant to give feedback. So, they are uncomfortable discussing performance weakness directly with employees. Employees tend to become defensive and they tend to have an inflated assessment of their own performance. So, it is sometimes very uncomfortable to give them feedback. Solutions to overcome or to improve the feedback mechanism: train managers how to give effective feedback, use performance review methods, a counseling activity rather than a judgment. Call the person whose performance is being evaluated, bring them on a platform to discuss openly about where there are shortcomings, so that they can overcome the performance, their own performance problems. So, with this I would like to conclude this discussion on performance evaluation and the various methods of performance evaluation. Next, in the discussion of staffing and coordinating, I would be discussing about the next topic, that is compensation and benefit. Thank you.